Game of Thrones is simultaneously one of the best and worst TV shows out there. So while last time I covered the worst changes that Game of Thrones made from the books, today we're gonna look at the opposite and cover some of the best changes that Game of Thrones made from the books. So yeah, let's get it. We're gonna start this video off strong by discussing the Battle of Hardhome. So in the books, we actually don't get to see Hardhome. Instead, Jon sends a commander of Eastwatch, Cotter Pike, over to rescue the wildlings. All we hear from Pike and his fleet is one extremely eerie message mentioning dead things in the water, cannibalism, and fighting amongst the Night's Watch and wildlings. It's an absolute shit show, and Cotter begs Jon to send help by land. That's the last we hear from them, and judging by the foreshadowing, it will be the only time as well. George R.R. Martin will likely never reveal what went on at Hardhome, and will instead leave things up to our imagination. So because it's our imagination, we picture things how we want it to be, and if we actually see what happened, we're usually left disappointed. With this in mind, D&D walked a very thin line by actually deciding to show us Hardhome, and it was literally better than most of us could imagine. So as we all know, Jon borrows Stannis' ships and leads the mission himself. Once they arrive at Hardhome, they receive a mixed response, kill the Jobber Lord of Bones, and ask the wildlings to gather their elders. The scene where the Night's Watch and wildlings talk is one of the strongest highlights of Season 5. The Night's Watch and wildlings both hate each other, but after seeing what they've seen, know that this has to be done. There is no time for mistrust, scheming, or rekindling their petty war. They must stand together against a common foe and put their differences aside. It's the core message with the White Walker threat, and it was demonstrated here beautifully. So keep in mind, Hardhome was actually the first time we saw the White Walkers in action, so they needed to look strong. They come in a blizzard and just freaking decimate everything. Jon and some wildlings try to buy some time for the people getting on the boats, and we just get to sit back and freaking enjoy the chaos that unfolds. Oh, and who remembers that scene where Jon fights that White Walker? The look on that freaking thing's face when Longclaw stops his ice sword was legendary. And of course, the most notorious scene during Hardhome was the Night King raising his hands and resurrecting thousands of dead wildlings. After all that fighting, the only thing that they did was make the Night King's insurmountable army even bigger. Up until this point, we'd only heard that the White Walkers were the true threat, yet it's here where we understood that they were the true threat. The goal of Hardhome was to put the White Walkers over, and oh man, did they exceed. It was legendary. Oh Lord, thank God they changed this. So in the books, every character is about 5 years younger. The reason for characters being so young in the books is because George R.R. Martin originally planned for there to be a 5-year time gap. But as he continued to write, he realized his original plan wouldn't work out, and by then, it was too late to turn back. Now, to the book's credit, some characters actually benefited from this change. Robb Stark, whose character is far different from his show counterpart, is a prime example. Instead of being a straight up hoorah badass, he's more of a boy trying to act as a man. He's overwhelmed by everyone and everything, and while he never outright says it in front of people, it's clear that he's scared, confused, and really just longs for his old life. By having Robb be 15 years old, it adds a lot more to this than having him be in his early 20s. But the Robb Starks are few and between, as most characters definitely got the leg up from being older. Why? Well, let me paint a picture for you. Remember those scenes with Khal Drogo and Dany? You know what I'm talking about. Well, instead of being 18 to 19 years old like she is in the show, get this, she's fucking 13! And Drogo's not some teenager. He's still a big sweaty barbarian. This could not be aired on television. And creepiness aside, I may be alone on this, but I feel like the teenagers sometimes don't act like teenagers. Now yes, given the circumstances and whatnot, they of course will be more mature than your average teenager. But I don't know, man. I just think back to myself when I was 14 to 16 years old, and dear Lord, thank God I was not born in Westeros. I would have lasted less time than Ned Stark in King's Landing. But personal experience aside, aging up the characters was definitely the right decision. Oh dear. Jorah frickin' Mormont. What if I told you our favorite handsome, chivalrous, and charismatic knight was a fucking weirdo in the books? Yeah, Book Jorah is not at all like his show counterpart. And if you're reading the books for the first time, be ready for a shock when this guy's around. Remember when I said Dany was a young teenager in the books? Well, while Dany's age may have changed, Jorah's love for her didn't. And it doesn't just stop at love. The guy literally sneaks into her cabin at night and non-consensually grabs and kisses her. It is as bad as it sounds. This literally freaks Dany out to the point where she doesn't even feel safe around this dude and always makes sure they're never alone after this. Like, what the fuck? Jorah's also very manipulative. He always tries to turn Dany against her advisors because he feels threatened by their presence, saying how untrustworthy they all are, when he knows damn well he's the one betraying her, as if being a manipulative predator wasn't enough for this dude. The guy's also evil. He never shows remorse over the fact that he sold slaves, and still hates Ned Stark for wanting to execute him because he feels as though his execution wasn't warranted. And that's the thing with this guy. He never takes accountability for his actions. He's delusional, plain and simple. Now let's get one thing straight. Show Jorah is no saint, especially at the beginning. He still sold slaves, still spies on his queen, and still obsesses over her. However, the difference between the two is how they decide to go from there. Show Jorah is actually able to get over his exile. He accepts that selling slaves was wrong, that Eddard Stark was right to want to kill him, and that his hate was unwarranted. When Daenerys confronts him about spying on her, though Jorah does bullshit, he in the end apologizes. And I think it was genuine. Book Jorah, on the other hand, tries to worm his way out, saying things like, "You must forgive me," to try and manipulate Dany. His delusion and lack of accountability is what makes Dany send him away, not the crime itself. Dany actually planned on forgiving Jorah, but he was so arrogant that she's like, "Hey, fuck you." Had Show Jorah been in the place of Book Jorah, he would have never been sent away. And finally, the dude isn't a fucking pedo! Yes, Jorah still loves Dany, but never once breaks the physical barrier with or even flirts with her. Plus, she's a grown-ass woman, not a 13 to 15-year-old girl. What are we doing? To put it best, to Book Jorah, Dany's his crush first and queen second, while for Show Jorah, Dany is his queen first and crush second. Show Jorah accepts his past and that Dany doesn't love him like he wants her to. And listen, I'm not saying that Book Jorah is a bad character. That could not be further from the truth. He's an extremely interesting and complex character, but the show iteration will always be my preferred version of the two. While many people may have not seen this coming, this had to be on my list. The battle for Castle Black was much better in the show than it was in the books. In the books, the battle for the wall is divided into two separate parts: the battle for Castle Black itself and the wildling siege of the wall. Like in the show, there are wildlings south of the wall that attack Castle Black, but the difference here is that they do so prior to the arrival of Mance Rayder's army. So when they do attack, the Watch is able to solely focus on them. We see the battle through Jon's perspective, where he and some Night's Watchmen are in a tower firing arrows at the oncoming wildlings. And just a side note, Jon at this point hasn't recovered from his leg wound suffered at the hands of Ygritte, and that's why he isn't using Longclaw. Anyway, with the help of a clever deception, the wildlings are defeated. And when the real army arrives, Jon is given command of the wall by Donald Noy, and it's up to him to lead the Watch against Mance Rayder. Wildlings throw giants, a massive battle ram, mammoths, and whatever else is in their army. But with Jon in charge, the Watch is able to stand firm until Stannis' forces arrive. So what's the issue here? Absolutely nothing. The battle for the wall was epic in the books. It's just that the show one-upped it. First and foremost, it is way more chaotic. By having the wildlings attack simultaneously from both sides of the wall, it gives a feeling like the Night's Watch is getting crushed between the weight of both forces. But that's getting ahead of ourselves, because even before the battle began, it was great. Some of my favorite dialogue scenes are in this episode. Sam's speech about what it's like being a man of the Night's Watch to Gilly, Maester Aemon's recollection of his long-lost lover, and of course, Sir Alliser admitting his faults and telling Jon the struggles of being a leader. And let's talk about Alliser Thorne, man. Let's talk about this dude for a sec. Despite being a side character, the man stole every scene he was in. Yes, he still hates Jon. That will never change. But when things go down, he throws away his petty hate and doesn't let his personal feelings interfere with their survival. And when word reaches him that wildlings south of the wall are attacking, he shows no hesitation in leaving the safety of the wall for the perils of Castle Black. I mean, guys, brothers, 100 generations have defended this castle. The Night's Watch will stand. Like, dude, they gave what? That's fucking awesome. They didn't give that. He got none of that in the books. Anyway, as for Mr. Lord Snow, they did not disappoint. D&D made Jon play a bigger role in the actual fighting, as he isn't injured, while not taking away from his leadership. Jon is still the one to lead the watch against Mance, but he does so while also slicing the shit out of some wildlings. The last major change I want to discuss is Sam Tarly. In the books, Sam isn't even at the wall during the battle. He's still off in no man's land with Gilly, but man, we saw a ton of character development for this guy during the battle. Instead of being the cowardly boy he was in season 1, we see that the journey north has changed Sam. Despite having the option to hide away with Gilly where it'd be safe, something which he would have undoubtedly done in the past, Sam instead puts himself right in harm's way and joins the fight. The fear, which as this were plagued his life, didn't magically dissipate. It's all still there. Yet what did dissipate was Sam's habit of giving into the fear. A boy went north, and a man came back. The Watchers of the Wall was simply Game of Thrones at its best. Yes, the books are great, but with a little more chaos, Sam's character development, Sir Alliser showing us his good side, and Jon being a badass, I felt that the show won up the book here. Tyrion's trial. This one may also come as a shocker, seeing as both book and show versions are pretty similar, and while this may be true, the changes the show made turned a strong plot point into arguably the best in the series. So let's imagine you're Tyrion. You're being sent to a cold, dismal place for a crime you didn't even commit by your own family, with your lover being the key person testifying against you. Yeah. That's a pretty shitty situation to be in, and is an extremely emotional and important moment for the character. With this in mind, let's just fast forward to Tyrion's outburst. Not only was the show's version superior dialogue-wise, but it did a better job of capturing the emotion Tyrion was feeling. His outburst in the books was short, to the point, and powerful. It is by no means a bad scene, but upon first read, it felt lackluster and far less dramatic in comparison to the show. Show Tyrion slowly turning, saying, "I saved you. I saved this city and all your worthless lives. I should have let Stannis kill you all." Along with that deep violin was perfect. These lines aren't even said in the books and are instead only thought by Tyrion when the court is laughing at Shay's testimony. And how about this? "Watching your vicious bastard die gave me more relief than 1,000 lying whores," while staring dead at the woman who believes he murdered her son. Just another fantastic line, which is absent in the books. And of course, we cannot forget about Peter Dinklage's superb acting, which was a cherry on top of an already phenomenal scene. And we also must discuss the climax of the scene. That being Tyrion's decision to roll the dice and go by a trial by combat. A big reason why I love this decision in the show is because it seems to come out of nowhere. No one's promised to fight for him, and he's probably throwing his life away. But Tyrion's reached his breaking point. It's his final fuck you to the world, which has always treated him like shit. It's a decision made out of impulse. Whereas in the books, when Tyrion demands his trial by combat, not only is this decision contemplated numerous times, but he also has a willing champion in Oberyn, ready to fight for him. So when he makes a decision, it's not out of left field and it's to be expected. Again, no problems here, but I preferred the show's way of going about things. Another key piece in Tyrion's trial was Prince Oberyn Martell. When Oberyn enters Tyrion's cell and tells that story, man, It was an amazing scene from every aspect. That's not a monster. That's just a baby. Learning that Cersei, since the day Tyrion was born, has hated his very existence, made us feel as unsettled towards Cersei as it made us feel sympathetic towards Tyrion. It's like he was destined to fail from the get-go, which only adds to his line of "I'm on trial for being a dwarf." This scene is also very emotional for Oberyn. This dude has been waiting 2 decades to avenge his sister and her children, and finally has an opportunity to bring justice to his family. I mean, wow, what a scene. In the books, Oberyn still tells Tyrion the story of how they met, but the circumstances are much different. Oberyn tells the story when they meet for the first time in King's Landing, and instead of being a deep emotional moment, it's instead more of like a "why is he telling me this?" So once Oberyn reveals that he will fight for Tyrion, it's lacking that emotional weight it has in the show. Plus, it's before Tyrion demands a trial by combat, so if he doesn't have a champion, he can choose to be exiled and survive, which makes it a much less dire situation. And to end this segment off, I'd like to talk about Jaime Lannister. In the books, Jaime is still the one who ends up saving Tyrion from execution, but never interacts with Tyrion during the trial or even visits him in his cell. By adding the scenes we saw with Jaime and Tyrion, we actually get to see their bond, which is something we barely get to see in the books. However, there's more to these scenes than just 2 brothers having a good old time. They're really sad. It feels like Jaime was trying to make the most out of whatever time remained to his brother, reliving past memories and trying to just forget about the fucked up situation at hand. So in essence, the show did a better job of capturing the emotions which were felt by the characters involved, and thus led to a better trial. Okay, so I'm going to be doing a little bit of cheating here. When I discuss Theon, I'm only going to discuss one scene. One scene which not only made his arc better, but it's a scene which should have undoubtedly been in the books. So, what is this scene? Well, the scene I'm referring to is the scene where Theon almost sends a letter to Robb to warn him of Balon Greyjoy's impending attack. For such a short scene, it adds a large amount of complexity to the character. Theon has never felt like he was welcome at Winterfell, and resented the fact that he was a hostage to Ned Stark. Yet despite this hate, Theon has formed a strong bond with Ned's son Robb, and is closer to him than any of his actual family members. This decision should not be an easy one for Theon, and by having him almost send a letter to Robb, I think it logically makes sense for the character. Theon should be split on whether to stay loyal to Robb or to switch over to House Greyjoy. The conflict Theon exudes in this scene is the climax of what's been building inside of him for years. And unfortunately for him, he chooses wrong. In the books, Theon just turns on Robb. Not only is a scene where he burns the letter absent, but Theon doesn't even really monologue or think about the choice. It's clear that his head has been set for a long time, and I just don't like it. I don't like it. Yes, I know Theon was thrown into a shitty situation, but betraying your best friend, whom you just swore an oath of fealty to, or without much real conflict, was straight up unrealistic. By having Theon show more reluctance, it makes more sense logically, adds more sympathy towards the character, and I believe it emphasizes the conflict Theon has before and after he's taken Winterfell. As Maester Luwin says, Theon is not the man who he's trying to be, and by having him almost send a letter to Robb, it shows that who Theon really is the Theon who was with Robb. And by burning this letter, he's symbolically burning who he really is and letting himself turn into ash. Arya Stark and Tywin Lannister. A unique but awesome combo, which was unfortunately absent in the books. Instead of being the cupbearer to Tywin Lannister, Arya is instead the cupbearer for Roose Bolton. And although I enjoyed these two together, man, it just pales in comparison to the Arya and Tywin scenes we saw in the show. My biggest issue with Arya serving as Roose Bolton's cupbearer is that it seems to be over before it's begun. It literally lasts a chapter. While the two are together, Roose orders Arya around all day and there is no real connection between the two. Sure, it establishes the creepy Lord of the Dreadfort and gives us some insight on northern plans, but nothing really stands out like it does in the show. So with the books covered, let's talk about the things which make the Arya Tywin scenes in the show superior than the Arya Roose scenes in the books. First and foremost, Tywin frickin' Lannister. When there's nobody to bend to his will, no goals to achieve, and nobody to really intimidate, the Warden of the West has a change in demeanor. For being such a cold, ruthless, and evil character, he appears to have a not so bad side during these scenes. We are shown that even someone as bottom of the barrel as this dude is capable of at least some affection, which thus humanizes the character. We never really get this in the books, and I think it's a great change. Given the grayness of characters we see in A Song of Ice and Fire, I think it makes sense here to portray even someone as bad as Tywin as not being pure evil. Another thing that these scenes added to Tywin's character was some backstory. He tells Arya of his father, Tytos, and how he almost ended House Lannister because of his weakness. It gives a potential reason as to why this character is the way he is. And as for Arya herself, she really won me over with these scenes. Prior to this, I never really felt much towards her. While I won't go as far as to say she became one of my favorites after these scenes, she definitely got boosted off the list big time. Her witty and clever back and forth with Tywin were nice, but what really won me over was her bravery. This girl was willing to call out Tywin Lannister to his face and didn't give any fucks about it. Moreover, the dialogue in these scenes was some of the best we got in the series. There's so many lines to pick from, whether it be Arya telling Tywin to his face that he's not invincible, or careful now girl, I like you, but be careful. Lines like these are what I turn to when I hear people say that D&D were incapable of making good scenes without source material, because they did it here. The dialogue provided comedy when Tywin was roasting his bannermen, insight on the war, lore, and just a strong sense of tension through it all. And since we're talking about tension, it is the one underlying thing you cannot ignore throughout these scenes. Tywin, with each passing moment, seems to itch closer and closer to discovering who Arya is. And if he figures out her identity, what then? Does he imprison her? Send her back to King's Landing? Kill her? All these questions are racing through our minds during these scenes. And the tension isn't solely exclusive to Arya. It also applies to Tywin. Wait, what? What do I mean? Well, need I remind you, there's a faceless man in town. Will Arya speak Tywin's name to Jaqen? Or will she let him slip through her fingers? Both characters, while enjoying each other's company, are in extreme danger. These scenes here are widely regarded as some of the show's best. And for good reason. They're filled with great dialogue, lore, tension, comedy. I mean, these scenes have it all. And we're a big step up from the books. The final change we're going to cover in this video is a change in perspective the show made from the books. As many of you know, the Song of Ice and Fire books are told via the perspectives of viewpoint characters. Although I'm a fan of telling the story with these viewpoint characters, it can be very limiting at times. The reason why is due to the fact that so many important scenes happen off screen because there's no viewpoint present. I think the biggest example of this is Robb Stark's entire campaign in the Westerlands. Because Robb nor anyone he's with are viewpoints, his marriage to Jane Westerling, the Battle of Oxcross, and the rest of his book-long conquest in the West all happen off screen. However, because Game of Thrones is a TV show, it can branch away from this and have scenes with basically anyone. Many of these scenes, which can't happen in the books, are some of the show's best. So let's look at some. And what better way to start than the frickin' infamous Lord Varys and Peter Baelish scenes? I had to mention it. Here we have the two best players in the Game of Thrones going head to head. This was like watching an unstoppable force meet an immovable object. Lord Varys is all about putting a ruler of his choosing on the Iron Throne to establish peace. To do this, he formulates a massive plan and patiently enacts it from the shadows. Lord Baelish, on the other hand, is a lot more impulsive. He feeds off chaos and is constantly adapting to the situations he finds himself in. They have totally different strategies, yet are brought together by one thing, and that's their desire to win the Game of Thrones. I think my favorite of their scenes is the first, where they're basically comparing dick sizes. I saw you, oh yeah? Well, I saw you. I'd have no problem if you said the dialogue these scenes feature is the best in the entire series, which is a huge feat considering the material is all from scratch. In the books, I am literally unable to recall an interaction between these two. I'm certain they've talked to each other at small council meetings, but that's all the books have to offer as far as these two going at it. And that's like going to a Michelin star restaurant just to get chicken fingers and fries, man.
It's fucking love!
Another fantastic scene which we were able to see is Cersei and Robert's conversation in season 1. I think this scene did a great job of capturing the man Robert Baratheon was. He's no fool and wise in the ways of warfare, but the dude's just a fucking mess, man. He's convinced himself that Lyanna Stark is all he's ever wanted, yet he can't even recall what she looks like. He just wants to waste away and run from his problems. His marriage to Cersei was a disaster, and as the scene points out, was destined to fail from the get-go. Both of them shunned each other because they were still in love with corpses. Robert wasn't Rhaegar, and Cersei wasn't Lyanna. And of course, you know, Robert's a depressed drunk, and Cersei is a literal psychopath. The last scene I must talk about is Tywin's first scene with him and Jaime. This was the perfect introduction to the Lord of Casterly Rock. Tywin raving about the family legacy, skinning the sigil of the house he's actively destroying while getting his hands dirty, lets us know what this dude's all about. It makes you go, whoa, this fucking dude means business. And guys, these are merely 3 of what are dozens of fantastic scenes we could talk about. But unfortunately, if I were to cover them all, we'd be here all day. By changing the perspective, sure, we aren't privy to characters' thoughts, but what we get in return is scenes where no viewpoint characters are present, which, as we saw with some of the scenes I went over, can be some of the best in the entire series. Alrighty, so let's do a quick overview of what we covered in this video. We started this epic video off with the freaking Battle of Hardhome. And because I'm not booked Jorah, I preferred the age bump characters got. Speaking of Jorah, I preferred the direction the show chose to go with him. Tyrion's trial, while being similar to the books, was overall executed much better. The same can be said for the show's Battle for Castle Black. I also preferred Arya being the cupbearer to Tywin Lannister, rather than the cupbearer to Count Dracula, Roose Bolton. The scene where Theon almost sends a letter to Robb not only made sense character-wise, but it also made me go, hey, maybe this dude isn't that big of a cunt after all. And finally, the change in perspective the show had from the books allowed for scenes which would be impossible in the books to happen. These were all the changes that the show made from the books, which for me, one up the books. Unlike my worst changes video, this one will unfortunately not get a sequel. At least I don't think, as I pretty much covered everything I needed to cover here. And yeah, that's been my video. I hope you enjoyed. This is the Italian Man 26 signing off. Have a great day. Bye.